Hey guys, welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This podcast is not to change your mind, but to invite you into somebody else's narrative. This is a podcast to give a voice to the neglected. It is also an opportunity for all of us to engage.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Neglected Podcast. My name is Nick Schultz. You can hit me up at Schultzy Time. We are at For the Neglected. We are here at City Church. Thank you for hosting us. And producer Quinn is over there. Quinn, thanks for being here, man. And we have a special guest today. His name is Andre Anson. And man, I'm pumped you're here today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Nick.
And I got connected with you because you were actually on a podcast with a friend of mine here in the studio named Matt Rogie.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of get into like how you guys got connected through that. And I was actually sitting here for your podcast because Matt asked me to be here because of some of the things that he was like, man, you can really explore those further with Andre in his life. And once I heard your story, I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, you're perfect for what we're trying to do here, and hopefully can give you a voice and an avenue to really speak and share some of the things you've gone through so it can help other people. So
Absolutely.
I'm excited about that, man.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem, man. So let's get right into it because there's a lot to talk about, but we're going to do something a little bit unique. We talked about this ahead of time was, normally we go back and start with a person's story, how they grew up when they were young, where they grew up at, and the surrounding neighborhood and stuff like that. But for you, we're going to start your story at a different point in time. So I'm going to kind of like let you.
A very specific date.
Yep. So why don't you go ahead and go with that right now?
So for me, my life tape starts July 25th, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved in a very horrific car accident. It was 4 cars that were involved. During the course of this accident, I was knocked unconscious. And when I came to in the hospital in Memorial, I didn't have any recollection of anything prior to that moment. So I didn't know my name. I didn't know why I was in the hospital. I didn't know what my injuries were from. It wasn't until the officers and nursing staff that happened to be in the building were, just associating with me that it became apparent that I didn't have any sort of recollection, and they would start to explain certain things about how I got there,
Mm-hmm.
the nature of the car accident, and the fact that I had a passenger, which at that time, she would eventually become the mother of my children. It was a recovery. Part of the reason why we're telling the story that way is because I had to go through every single day as if it was just a regular day. But when it came down to any sort of reflection on yesterday, I had no recollection.
So that was the farthest back you could only remember what was going on right then and there.
Honestly, in my brain, the furthest that I will go is July 25th, 2009.
Wow. To this day right now.
Still to this day. It's almost like I wake up, almost like a 51st dates, if you will, or like a Jason Bourne kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it's just, I don't have the honest recollection. If I do have anything, it's a fabricated memory based off of people's stories in black and white that I've been able to find about my life.
So was it just the past and remembering things, or were there certain things that you had to learn how to do all over again?
Even that I still struggle with memory issues. I still stumble with my speech. There's just a different set of circumstances that I'm under now in life due to some just damage from my brain, basically, from being rattled around in that car accident.
But if somebody like handed you a toothbrush after that and said
I'd know
you knew what to do with it,
right?
like,
I know how to brush my teeth, tie my shoes, walk. It wasn't a complete. It was just I had no understanding of who I was.
So what's that like to go through then? Like when you start coming to and you realize that all of a sudden you realize like I don't understand who these people are, or why can't I remember anything? And man, I know nothing about my childhood, who I am, who my parents are. Like
it didn't bother me initially. At first, it was just I recognize your face. Just like when we did the last podcast, I recognized your face. I just couldn't place you.
Yeah,
and that's what it becomes for me. I may see someone today who, if I saw Matt, I would see Matt and I would recall certain things about what I know about Matt, but it's not like I can recall every single time we've done a mission, or any particular mission brief that we had to do. It doesn't come to me that way. So it's a struggle every day, and I wake up to this struggle daily. So this is something I overcome. It's a challenge I overcome every day.
So about 11 years ago, you lose all memory of what happened to you from birth not that you can remember birth, but at least the facts of birth and all the way up until that time. So what do you do? Like, do you go on a mission to find out all that information? And how do you go about even finding that out?
It was a natural occurrence. Just it started with the cases with the accident itself. People started asking questions I couldn't recall. I would have to ask other people. So it became a thing of, hey, do you remember when this happened? Do you remember? Am I recalling this correctly? Someone told me this. What's the real story? And once I started to see that there was conflicting information, that's when it became a thing of a search for the truth. And that's kind of what I'm still on today. But that's honestly what leads me to this moment where I am today with you.
Wow. So what did you find out that you can tell us about your past, like where you grew up and what your family was like and neighborhood, any of those kind of things?
So I ended up going back home actually after the service, shortly after this accident, several months after the accident, where I was able to kind of rekindle with family members I had been estranged from for many years, friends that I had been estranged from. And I had an opportunity to have conversation, hey, do you remember when we did so-and-so? And I couldn't recall. Hey, you remember when you broke Mrs. So-and-so's window? That I don't recall. So it became that kind of a thing where it was, what did we do when we were 8 years old? What happened during this time? So from what I've been able to gather, I grew up in Jamaica, Queens. I grew up with my mother and father initially in a home, married, the normal business, but they had their own differences. They had their own issues. And this is what starts my real story of my life. My mom and my dad had their issues, and that led to some alienation between my dad and my mom. My mom ended up stepping away from my dad. They never really were fully divorced. They just separated, and I lived a majority of my life with just my mother. I never really knew much about my dad, but I could go and see him. So some other questions that I did have would come about when I would ask about my dad, where he was, what was going on, and I found out that he was in a hospital, and he had been dealing with some mental issues for quite a bit of time. So once again, the investigation comes in and I ask further questions. What happened with my dad? And somewhere in my research, it was my dad was coming up in the 80s as a DJ, New York City is brand new. Hip hop is, just starting. The argument of the birthplace of hip hop is critical at this moment. And my dad happens to be, spinning records. That was a big thing. But he also was tech savvy, where he had the computer in the home and he was learning how to synthesize music with computers in the 80s and 90s. So he was very advanced, but he was so focused on his craft. I guess there was an issue with what was going on with family, and that just split that.
And were you up in Jamaica, Queens up until you graduated high school, or did you ever move at all?
We moved quite a lot, as a matter of fact. Once my mother stepped away from my dad, we moved. It felt like every year, every other year.
Really?
We never really stayed stable. There was no honest stability.
Still up in the Northeast, or are you going around the country?
All around Queens, all around, New York. We even did maybe about a year or two stint in Jersey City, New Jersey. We really didn't go far, but we definitely did not stay put.
So what did you find out about like little Andre, man? Whether you were like grade school age or teenage age, what did you discover you were like when you didn't know?
What I do know about myself is that apparently I was a really smart kid. I was a sharp kid, but quite mischievous. Sharp, just like my dad, into things that were probably more advanced than what they should have been for someone of my age. But it seems as if it's just a very tumultuous time dealing with all of those other dynamics. And there were a lot of moments that I can definitely recall where there are moments of angst, moments of anger, moments of fussing and fighting with myself, my mother, some of my family members. Those things I do remember. Some traumatic things I can definitely recall.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. It's like, what what kind of things have you found out that whether they are an event or just, personality based, like these things happened and I can see how those might have made me who I am now, even though I can't remember them. Like these events happen and now it makes a little bit more sense of, either what I believe or what I think or what, I'm interested in. Like what kind of things did you find out like you experienced?
As a young man, I had a mechanical aptitude. I had a thing. I learned later on that my uncles and folks around me were very much into these kinds of things. They did woodworking. My uncle was a big time mechanic. He worked on all of his cars and vans and things of that nature, motorcycles and such. So with me being around some of these other family members, it also exposed me to other things that some children shouldn't be exposed to. And one of those things happened to be a recollection that I actually have of enduring sexual abuse as a young child, in and around the age of about 5 years old. Just being away from my mom as she's working and doing the things that she's doing to provide, you would have to be around other family members or even friends of the family. So, in lieu of babysitting, So in those particular places, there were instances where folks did things that they shouldn't have.
And you remember those?
And I do recall those things.
Because they were that kind of traumatic?
They were that traumatic. It's something that got pulled out with the rest of the trauma of my combat experience and such in life.
And you remember like who did it to or just that they haven't? Wow.
I actually about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I actually had an opportunity to speak about it out loud amongst the family. So they are mostly all aware. And if not, they're definitely aware now.
Yeah.
That these things were occurring as far back as about 5 years old. And it went on for maybe 5-6 years,
man,
during my growth into my adolescence.
Did you have siblings or cousins at all that maybe experienced that same kind of stuff too?
Very much so. This turns into a very eerie story after some time.
Yeah.
Just watching the generational chain that had been continuing to just roll through. As I investigated my own traumas, it turns out that there were so many others that were dealing with this from many generations even before me.
Wow.
So it really just hit a nerve,
yeah, I bet.
Me asking these kinds of questions, which is why I think it was such a divine thing that I would lose this memory only to go back and research these things that I probably would never otherwise have interest in. You know what I mean? You would just go, whatever that was yesterday, I'll move on, but I didn't know yesterday.
Right.
So I had to ask. I had to challenge the truth, and that led me down a very dark path with my family. So quite a bit of those kinds of things going on.
And did that ever stop when you were a teenager? Was there a point you remember like not experiencing that anymore? And was it only when you were a young child and vulnerable to a point, or did that happen?
It seems as if somewhere in there I found the street. I was around a group of kids that just we bonded through our personal traumas. A lot of us had dealt with these kinds of things ourselves, and we just kind of became one. We hung out, and next thing you know, I'm hanging out in the street, and hanging out later and later at night. I ended up, getting a bicycle, like a BMX style bike, and kind of touring my own neighborhood and getting further and further into mischief as time went along. And these are the parts where I have some faint memories of just being a troublesome kid, being a mischievous kid. Mom was always at work. I didn't trust some of these people that she had me around. I didn't want to be associated. I stayed to myself. I hung with my friends, and we got ourselves into mischief. You know what I mean? I'm in New York City.
Yeah.
Anywhere between 12 and 16, 17 years old. And this is pre 9/11. This is pre all of the stuff that we know today.
Yeah.
So it was a much different time. It's coming off of the tail of many things that are dark about New York in the 80s and 90s.
So you say mischief, and is there something that happens where the mischief goes too far and either you get in trouble or you make a decision like, this isn't for me anymore? What was there a moment that happened that kind of you had to choose where you're going to go in life?
I had a major turning point that I recall. This was during the time frame of my senior year in high school, leaving high school. This is post 9/11. I was in my class seat in senior high school watching as the towers fell. Still into the mischief, still out into the street. I ended up, selling marijuana in the streets and just doing things that I really just had no business doing. It came from an honest place, but it was dishonest stuff. And I'm sitting in the basement of my grandmother's house, and I'm with a couple of friends, and we're just all about the wrong things at this point. We get done with, what we're doing with our mischief, and we go down to the very next corner to the store. We had the munchies, so we go and we get our food, we get our little snacks and our quarter waters and whatnot. And as we're hanging out front, we realize that it's about time to go. So those folks, they go around the corner one way, I go around the corner the other way towards my grandmother's house. The next morning, my phone starts ringing off the hook. Come to find out, it's a phone call coming from Rikers Island. Those same friends that I was just hanging out with the night before were arrested and charged for things that we were doing mischievously. And it was at that point that I really realized that someone is sticking their neck out for me, so to speak. Somebody is looking after me. Wow. And I made it a point. I had already touched base with an Army recruiter, and I had made it a point to really go forward with my decision at that point to kind of, step away from that kind of a life and do something positive. My whole goal and aspiration at that moment was to go to school, to be able to afford it. I couldn't afford it. So you do the best you can. It was, dishonest stuff that I had to do, but that was the goal, but the Army gave me that opportunity along with changing my life completely and just opening the door wide for opportunities in life.
So that was getting out of high school, and you maybe thought you wanted to go to college, but instead you decided, hey, Army's going to be...
I actually tried to go to college. I was trying to go to Nassau Community College in Long Island, New York. Enrolled in everything, and I had an issue with my mother at the time about signing FAFSA paperwork. And I was still young enough where she had to. Yeah. And she was in that weird tax bracket where she didn't make enough to really pay for it, but she made too much for me to really benefit. And it was just a fuss just trying to get her to sign off on these papers, whatever the issues were in our family dynamic, it really got in the way and kind of impeded on that issue. So I went to the Army. Uncle Sam said, we'll pay for college. So let's go. So that's how we got to that point.
Okay. So what do you, it's hard to say the word remember because you don't, but what have you been able to discover about your time in the Army and your beginning time? And you obviously developed into doing a whole lot of stuff, which is really impressive. And like, you can explain that too, but just, how did you get to where you ultimately ended up?
Well, it was born out of the struggle. Here I was now. All of those things we just finished discussing, these are things that I discovered along my route. What's really truly happening is I'm continuing on with my time in special operations, like we already discussed with Matt on his show. I'm going through my time. So now this is years after I've retired. I've already gone through the medical evaluation board, retiring from the military. And I now had a stack of papers that were probably about a good 2 feet high of every bit of my entire military records, to include my medical records. And my mother and I, we sat down and we painstakingly laid this paperwork out in as close to chronological order as possible, including everything from my initial entry all the way until my retirement. And through that, I was able to kind of discover who I was to everyone else in the military. That's when I saw, the accolades, the awards, and I was able to read the narratives that were associated with the awards to kind of get a better idea of what I had been involved in my time.
It's so interesting how you put that too. Discover who you were to everyone else.
Right, because these
they're
are
telling
other people's
you
words.
the story about who you were.
Right. These are other people's words. Some of my supervisors, these are guys that I used to hang out with, I worked with every day. Those are their words that are written down on these documents.
So what did you find out about yourself during that time?
I've got quite a few awards, quite decorated. Some folks have some other names that they'd like to call me. I can be a testy guy, according to this paperwork. However, they also spoke about how I have such a commanding presence They spoke about how I keep myself very professional.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There were quite a few things about just what I had done in my career, to include some missions and the things that went awry during the missions. As we discussed earlier, there was a situation where we had to go and pick up some guys from a very bad set of circumstances in the middle of the snow. And they were suffering with a lot of cold weather injuries. And we were already task saturated trying to deal with the issues and the injuries. And I happened to notice on a fault panel that there was an issue going on with the helicopter mechanically. So now here we are, I'm having a battle with someone like Matt saying, hey, sir, we have to do XYZ in order for us to continue our safe flight home with these guys on board. And so because I was able to handle that, do my job in the middle of chaos and still protect the rest of the crew and aircraft, you know, I was awarded my first, or no, at this point it would be my second air medal from the Army. So,
yeah, man. I mean, I've got a list. You sent me some stuff, and I
I think there's a whole list. You can
I
read
got
it
a
off.
list of your accomplishments and medals and things like that, and it's really impressive, man.
Yeah,
it really is. That's awesome. I mean, I appreciate that, what you're willing to do and sacrifice for our country, man. It's really impressive what you've been able to do. And so you've got your 2009 car accident,
right?
And so military wise, how often were you deployed or go on missions before that accident?
Before that accident, I had 5 deployments.
Okay.
1 to Iraq, 4 to Afghanistan.
Okay. All right. Which is a lot.
Right. After that accident, actually, it was about 90 days after that accident, I had gone on my 5th tour to Afghanistan, my 6th tour overall.
All right. And so to me, that's another big point in your life that I think we're going to have to talk about a lot, and where some of this stuff comes up is you have a major car accident.
Yes.
And you end up going back overseas on a deployment, what I would think is pretty soon after a major car accident. And you're not all there mentally, at least I wouldn't think, because you can't remember so much of the stuff in your life. So take me through, from what you've been able to gather, how did you go from that serious of an accident and where you are mentally to, hey, he's okay enough to go send him over on a duty to Afghanistan?
Well, that's the big hiccup with this thing, because the injury is in the brain. You can't see it. It's hard to see what's wrong and what's damaged and how damaged it truly is without the aid of very specific machines. Mm-hmm. So there was no major evidence at this point that anything was wrong. And to your fleshly eyes, you go, oh, you look fine. All 10 fingers, all 10 toes. Mm-hmm. Look here, look here, look here. Okay, you're good. And for all intents and purposes, I was good until it was time to perform my duties, perform my task, or recall some sort of information that was necessary to always retain. I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And folks were like, hey, you're supposed to be doing this check ride and you're failing this miserably. It's like you're not studying. And I'm in there studying so intensely. And I couldn't retain new information. I was having a hard time putting new things in my head. And yet I couldn't draw from older experiences in my head either. So I was looking like a private. Mm-hmm. Here I was, a sergeant, someone that was expected to know and do and be the tip of the spear with this. And I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So it started to show. Other folks were saying, hey, there's something wrong, but we can't quite put our finger on it. But the need of the military, Uncle Sam's, request, is always answered before anyone else's. Mm-hmm. So I had to go do the job. And
you're good at what you do. So
and
you had
I'm
that
good at what I do.
Going against you, even though it looks like it's going for you.
So it got to a point where there was just a series of circumstances where it really required me to be confident. It required me to recall certain terminology, and I couldn't do it. And instead, I went with just my instinct. I went with just that gusto that guys in my position have, and it led to a pretty rough accident in the helicopter. This is something that I had kind of discussed with Matt on the last show, and we got shook up. We busted the fuel tank and tore off some landing gear, and we did some real good damage to this bird, to this helicopter. But in the process, it really shook up whatever else was left of me. And other folks started to see that. Later letters from folks to help me with my fight with the VA about what I had gone through, they would expose the fact that they could see clearly that my mind wasn't there. I had the stare, my whole being was disturbed. They could see that. And that just continued on just a few days later with the loss of another aircraft and the crew on board. That devastated the entire unit. It didn't even just devastate me alone. It devastated an entire group of guys.
Did you feel responsible for any of that?
Always. Because I wasn't on top of my game. I could tell something was wrong, but just like everyone else, I couldn't put my finger on it. And so it does bring along a sense of guilt. You know, the military will teach you later on, would teach me later on that these things are called things like survivor's guilt and things of that sort. But yes, this is something that has been the major disturbance that really pushed me to ask the deeper question, why? Because now we fast forward a few years, I'm being medically retired. Folks are saying, hey, you've definitely been cooked. You need to go sit down.
Okay. Before we get to that point, how long were you still active duty after these accidents happened?
I stayed active. I went back and forth between active and National Guard for maybe another 4 years.
Okay.
And another deployment. That was the deployment when they really recognized things just really weren't okay. They now had something to compare it to. They saw everything prior to with the 5 other deployments, and then they saw these 2. The pattern of behavior in the last 2 deployments was enough for a doctor to say this guy needs to go sit down. We can clearly see something is amiss.
Did you stay the whole time, or did they send you back early? Or?
They sent me back early during my last deployment.
And that was kind of the end of it after?
That was the end of everything. That was when I had my first suicide attempt. That was when I was going through everything. I didn't know if people would really understand and believe what I'm saying. You know, people don't have that full-on understanding of the invisible damages, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And I don't want to gloss over a suicide attempt either. We don't have to get into like details of everything and like how you're trying to do it, but just even mentally from what you can remember emotionally, like where you are, why you decided to do it. Was it guilt? Was it just strictly stuff that happened in the military, or was it also drawn back of things that happened throughout your life and it was just too much altogether?
Everything. It was a combination of everything. The military piece was that final straw. If that makes sense. There was so much that was going on at home because I had no understanding of what the dynamics were between myself and family members. And, you know, I had a cousin that had been abusing me as a young child who now was causing all kinds of issues in my adult life. And I didn't really have the full-on understanding as to why she was being so malicious in my life. Only to find out later this was just a pattern of behavior that this young woman had been dealing with all her life. I had always been her little whipping boy, if you will. I had always been the one that I was the Charlie Brown and she was the Lucy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so those kinds of things were playing into my relationship at home with the mother of my children. It was playing into the family dynamic, me trying to be a dad for my kids. You know, I had no recollection of those key things that I needed to move forward. And then here I am deployed. Here I am back in a place that I told myself I would never be because of the nature of what went on when I lost my friends in the 2009 deployment. Now I'm back in the same exact place in 2012. It was a weird feeling of deja vu and all kinds of bad juju, you know? So there was a lot at play. It wasn't just any one particular thing. It was everything coming to a head.
So how can you be a father during this time? Like, with all the stuff you're going through, man. I mean, that's just...
I was failing miserably. I was failing miserably as a spouse. I was not coping well at all. And one of my vices was the comfort of a woman's touch. I didn't get the kind-hearted treatment that I felt like I needed when I got home. So I looked elsewhere. And that caused another rift within itself.
Yeah.
This is what I'm saying. There were so many different dynamics at play, but they were all playing out simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So issues of infidelity within the home, already having this lack of memory of who I used to be, what references I can pull from, there's nothing there. So I'm winging everything. I'm flying my life by the seat of my pants, and I'm failing at it miserably.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anybody you can talk to during this time, or you want to talk to, whether it's like professional help or just like a friend, a mentor?
I had no interest in wanting to speak. We have a code, you know, in the military and the special operations community. Just overall, as a man, there were just ways that we, you know, I was told as I went through life, that's not how you do those things. We don't talk about those things. We keep those things to ourselves. You know, why don't you sit down and have a drink, young man? Why don't you go smoke a little something, young man? You know, those were the kind of pathways that were laid out for me, and they didn't work so well. A fifth of Jack would go down faster than this bottle of water.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That didn't work for me so well. So yeah, all of these things were coming to a head, and alcohol was even involved in those incidents. You know, sneaking alcohol over there. That's a big no-no. That's the bigger reason why I got in trouble overseas and why this thing snowballed.
Wow.
You know,
for the suicide, was it something that was just built up over time where you thought about it for a while, or was it more of a just kind of all of a sudden hit you like now's the time kind of thing and you didn't know why? Or like
at that particular moment, it was just everything had just hit a wall.
Too much.
My relationship was shot. You know, the idea of being separated from my kids was coming into play because of the nature of what was going on in the relationship. Family was falling apart. I was losing my house. I was losing my finances. I was losing my mind. And then here I am still being asked to perform, you know, my job. And I mean, there was silliness in my job, mind you. Some of them could see that there was stress on my face. The first sergeant said, "We're going to take your sidearm from you, but we want you to go back to your job and go flying." And I told him, I said, "First sergeant, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you take my 9mm pistol away from me and then ask me to go get on board a helicopter with machine guns? If you're worried about me doing something I shouldn't do, why are you not worried about the other guns too? That doesn't make sense." You know, and at that point, the logic kicked in and first sergeant said, "Here's your pistol. You know what I mean? Go do your job." But I was breaking. I was folding. I was crumbling under pressure. And the alcohol and everything else that was going on in my life just made it even worse. So it all came to a head one day. And I was just very determined to just gracefully bow out from life. I went to a very quiet place. I disappeared away from the masses. I wasn't around anyone, and I had no reason to believe anyone would even look for me. No one wanted to be around me in that particular stage of my life. So a very miserable man at that moment. You know, very, very hard to deal with in that moment because of the silence, because of the secrets being kept, because of that guilt, that overriding guilt.
Did you fail at committing suicide, or did you just decide not to do it?
Someone knocked on my door in a moment when I thought no one would ever know I was available. I was there. I was in my room. I had no indicator that anyone would be looking for me. So as I made that decision, in that moment, I'm screaming out to God, and I'm asking him to stop this now. As I'm sitting there with my finger trembling on this trigger, as I'm chewing on the barrel of this 9mm Beretta. And then all of a sudden I hear this knock. And I thought I must have lost my mind. There's no way. And then I heard it a second time. The second time made me put it down. Because I said, okay, stop. Hold on 1 second. What's on the other side of this door? You know, and opening that door led to a pilot, no different than a guy like Matt Rogie, who just, let's talk. And the talking led to me being here. Now we're talking. You know, but it was a very dark moment. It was a very dismal situation, and it was just very much a moment I don't want to go back to.
Yeah.
if possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm doing everything in my power now never to return to a dark place like that
Yeah.
ever again.
Yeah, it's
It's
incredible,
hard.
man.
It's hard.
It's incredible that somebody knocked on that door at that moment and just kind of, we'll put all the pieces to get together as we can at the end, but just to see like kind of purpose in your life and why you're here, maybe why you went through all that stuff and continue to go through that stuff, but for a greater purpose. And it's incredible. I mean, I'm having a hard time getting my mind fully around it and just realizing the pain that you went through. Another side of it too, before finishing up with that, is just like, I imagine when you're in the military, you're doing missions and it's a brotherhood and you're relying on other men, they're relying on you, men or women, and you feel that close to not be able to perform to the expectations that they have for you, especially when you're that decorated and you've proven you can be that, but all of a sudden you're not anymore. Like how, I guess, difficult that would be for you. And if now other people are saying things to you and you realize like they don't view you the same way, or there's disrespect there, and like you can't live up to that, especially in that kind of environment when respect and trust is such a big deal, like how devastating that was for you.
And there was a play of dynamics with that scenario, with that situation, because I had transitioned from active duty,
Mm-hmm.
special operations,
Yeah.
to National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's a real honest to God step down, but to us in the military, that's kind of what it looks like for some.
Mm-hmm.
You work all the way up here, now you're down
Yeah.
here. Budget's different, money is different, all kinds of things are different. The cohesion is different. So with that being said, I went from, working with a guy like Matt, talking to a guy all day, kind of muddying the water with fraternization, between enlisted and officers. But at the same time, you had to build that brotherhood
Mm-hmm.
and that trust. We didn't have that on the other side with those particular guys. I was a newcomer to their unit. I came from a different background. They held a different standard for me. And they also had a different idea of what expectations I should be meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't meet those for them.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at me as if I should be some sort of a god. No, I'm a human being. I fail miserably
Mm-hmm.
daily. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And that was kind of another piece that was kind of expected, and because of some of the attitude that you're expected to have at the tip of the spear, it was frowned upon in this particular group. So
Mm-hmm.
as I was ruffling the feathers of the commander who was putting our lives in danger, as I ruffled the feathers of a pilot who was being a little too cocky, too big for his britches, it became a thing. And lo and behold, just a few, days and weeks after I had mentioned these things to these gentlemen, stuff went foul, stuff went wrong for them because of their actions that they had taken. So here it was, I was, for all intents and purposes, right in my ruffling of their feathers.
Mm-hmm.
For them not following proper procedure and protocol, putting people's lives at risk. However, the way I went about it was definitely very abrasive.
Yeah.
They didn't appreciate that. So that also changed the ability to be able to talk to people, because now I'm the rough guy in the room. We don't want to talk to you. Oh, boo-hoo. This is the same guy that flips over tables and chairs every time he's upset. They don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
But not recognizing the flipping of the tables and the chairs is a sign of my stress
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that I'm losing control.
Yeah.
So this was another piece of it.
Are they military at any point? Are they trying to get you like mental health assistance, or like, hey, you need to go talk this, we need to test you, we need to get you some kind of help? Or is it just go on?
The chaplain is the one that actually helped me. He's the one that said, if you ever feel like you're feeling right now, again, go see behavioral health. And so when I went into behavioral health the first time, they didn't even really want to talk to me. It was a poke and prod session. How sensitive are you to the things that I'm going to say to you next? And it was like, look, doc, I'm not here for your games. I'm having a rough day.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference here. So when I returned the second time after an altercation with a fellow, National Guardsman, I was put in a room with a different doctor. And when I explained to her that this chaplain said the next time I feel like this, I should talk to somebody, and I went and talked to somebody, and this guy gave me a runaround, now I'm out here fighting with my coworkers. We really need to do something. And that's when she finally decided to take a deeper interest into this stuff.
Okay.
That's what saved a little bit of my career. And she spoke up for me in the midst of some of this trouble I was getting into. And she said, listen, we've already spoken. He definitely needs to go home. He needs to sit down. He needs to go talk to somebody. He's having some really rough times
He
here.
finally needs help.
So that's what broke that ice. I had an advocate.
Wow.
And that's what leads me now to my advocacy, with the Red Tape Warrior stuff.
Yeah.
Because people need a hand up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
She gave me that hand up.
Yeah. And we'll kind of transition to where you're at now and what happened after you got out. But I also do want to ask before we go there, just because of what's going on in our culture right now, and because of some of the things we've talked about before off camera, just how your race has played a role in either your life growing up or what you found out, but also through military and experiences, how that has either affected you in a just non-way or like a very, difficult way.
Well, race was definitely in play throughout my whole entire life. There were conversations that I had with my mother as we're going through my life history, on paper with my military records. We're also simultaneously talking about my childhood. And, she would start to talk about some of the rough stuff that I went through as a kid as I'm explaining my military time. Things like the fact that, I had a very discouraging kindergarten teacher. It was one of those career day things, pick a career and explain why you would like to go down this path in your life. And I had picked a police officer. And it was, oh, no, you can't be a cop. Nobody like you can be a cop. And I didn't recall that. But my mother did. It was something that was that disturbing to her because she ended up coming into the school and expressing herself to this particular teacher. You will not discourage my child. There is no reason why that young man can't be a cop. Some of his family members are cops. So for you to even say that is very just, for a kindergarten teacher, you're shaping this kid the wrong way already. And this would be a theme going through my life. So much so as I'm becoming an adolescent, but before I'm really becoming mischievous in the streets, we had a thing called stop and frisk in New York City. People are familiar with it now.
Yeah.
They weren't so familiar with it when it was actually happening and going on. Here I was a kid, not into any mischief at this point, going to school every day, getting good grades. But because my parents were split, I would sometimes go to my grandmother's house to see my dad and try to have whatever relationship I could have with a man that has gone through what he's gone through. And one night I'm leaving from my grandparents. I'm getting on one of the city buses to get me into Rosedale where my mom was living at the time. And before I could walk the 4 or 5 blocks to the bus stop, I'm being paced in the street by a police car with 2 officers in it. And they're speaking to me, but I'm not trying to respond because I've been taught, we get the speech as a young man in this country, being black. You respond a certain way, you give the respect, but if you don't have to, please don't. They're looking for a reason. And sure enough, here's this guy harassing me about the particular coat that I happen to be wearing. He felt it was too expensive for me. It was a shearling coat. It's my dad's coat. And immediately it became a thing. He pulled the car over. They hopped out the car. They started giving me a few questions. Next thing you know, I'm up against the wall and they're running their hands through all my pockets and my book bag. There's nothing there. I'm not a mischievous kid. I get good grades in school. What is all of this about? And this was so consistent that it just became a thing. It was just a thing. No differently than you go to the fridge and get a water bottle. I go down the block and I get harassed by a police officer. It's just a thing. So much so when I returned from my training in the beginning of my career in the military, I went back home to New York to do this thing called hometown recruiting. And you just kind of bridge the gap between the recruiters and young students. And I was being harassed coming back from church one day with my mother. As we went to talk to my youth pastor, police officer saw that I had my Nextel on my hip. he assumed with it being silver on my hip that it was a pistol. So he asked, "What's on your hip?" "What do you think is on my hip?" Not realizing that was a very smart aleck response, but really, we're in New York City. You're not allowed to have pistols. Open carry is not the thing here. We know rights. Stop. It's not what you think it is. The guy got out the car. He didn't like my attitude. And in front of my mother and in front of my youth pastor, roughed me all up to the point where my youth pastor almost got involved. And another officer was like, "Hey, back off." You know, so this was just some of the things that had been going on as I, rolled into my adulthood. And then it just continued along with my time. This is where we come to why my name is displayed the way it is. My family name, my dad's name, my grandfather's name, Neville, very West Indian, very Jamaican name. A lot of people, when they first see it, don't know how to pronounce it. So I had a hard time dealing with my culture as soon as I stepped into the military because everyone would chew my name up. So Andre is a very fairly common name. You cut it down to Dre, everybody goes Dr. Dre. So cool, I'll be Dr. Dre. As long as it's something you can chew on, you don't mess up my name, I'm proud of my life. I'm proud of my heritage, And so from this day forward, I would always be Andre Anson to most in the military. You don't call me Neville unless you know me from home. You know what I mean? But it rolled into just games at first, jokes at first, pushing the color lines, pushing on the barriers. And then after some time, it became a thing of, chains, nooses. Some days I will go out to my helicopter to go do my pre-flight checks and such, and we had blade ropes to tie down the blades to keep them from flapping in the wind, and they were already tied up in nooses. Now, we just heard about the young man that's out there driving NASCAR, and he found one in his garage. And he's so upset, but that happened to me on a couple of different occasions coming out to my helicopter.
Are you the only black person?
I was one of two at the time.
Now, did you guys say anything to each other? Do you think anything of it at the time? Is it more you look back at it now and be like, man? There
was an incident where I actually had to go get the other guy involved because his job was as an equal opportunity supervisor. I don't know the full terminology for his title, but he was the EO guy. So it was his job to go and make sure everything was on the up and up. And I had to call him in the room one day and say, "Hey, you tell me, this is your job. Now you tell me how I'm supposed to respond to this moment." It was a very simple moment. It was around the time when President Obama was about to be inaugurated as the first black president of the United States of America to the world. And this man had a problem with it. And he was shouting whatever slurs he wanted to, saying whatever verbiage, using whatever verbiage he wanted to use out of anger. You have free speech, say what you want. But listen here, Chief, I'm gonna need you to tone it down. You're going way too far. "Oh, black that, black this, black that. Bro, I'm only gonna ask you one more time. The next time I'm just gonna close the gap. I'm just gonna close the space between you and I, and that is a threat. I'm letting you know that." And the next thing you know, we're on the floor and we're tussling around. It didn't take long. There was no need for that. It went too far. And then at the end of it all, when the fighting stops, I'm the one that's being asked to leave, as if I was the one that started the trouble. This was the kind of atmosphere that was going on towards my exit, from the Special Operations community. I couldn't take any more of that stuff. It was becoming too much. It was no longer a joke. There was a chain incident. There were these noose incidents. Now I'm actually getting into physical altercations where I have to go to the hospital. This is not okay.
Yeah.
For what point and purpose? Because you don't like the fact that this man is, imagine what the world would look like if I beat the living daylights out of somebody because this other president is in office right now. I mean, especially in the nature and the climate of this country now. Yeah. You know what I mean? So pardon me as some of my anger arises.
Yeah, well, I just imagine how difficult that is, not only because of the stuff that you're already going through mentally, whether you should even been out there at that point because of the things you went through, but also it's like I hear all the time, the brotherhood, brotherhood. And, I'm sure you want to feel that, you want to believe that, but then stuff like that happens and I'm imagine that, like, okay, like now I can see or feel you guys are more of a brotherhood, but you're kind of putting me on the outside here.
There was definitely a shaking of my core of what I believed in and what I thought about this particular place. You know, I still have a very deep love for the people who served, especially if you served during the time that I served in Special Operations.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very deep love for you, even in your ignorance. This is not just one of those, you know, Christian things either. This is like, no, I'm extending that extra bit of olive branch to you because you served with me. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but for those who were outside of the realm of that kind of behavior, oh, it's all love. It's definitely a brotherhood. It's still strong. These were still the same people who were supporting me as I was going through my fight with the VA. So it's not like it dissolved completely, but there were definitely some weak ones in the bunch, or some weak-minded ones in the bunch, I guess you can say, that allowed the climate of the world to interfere with the brotherhood and the love amongst us, you know? So,
well, let's get to the VA stuff and getting out, because that's where a lot of your story is happening right now in your current life and situation. And so explain to us what it was like when you did get out and you were trying to get the help that you know you needed, and whether you were successful or whether it did not go the way you wanted it to.
That's where this all starts. That's why the prompting of the investigative atmosphere of my life, because when I stepped away from the National Guard, not really regarding much about the days prior, when it's time for your medical evaluation board, the first thing they do is go into your past. So here I was being escorted away from my job, being put onto a plane and sent from overseas back to the States. And when I get to the United States, I was at Fort Drum, New York, they say to me, we have no record of your service prior to your time in National Guard. So we're prompting an investigation on you because you are wearing awards and ribbons on your uniform and claiming that they're real, and we have no evidence to prove otherwise. I'm looking absolutely bewildered, like, what do you mean? I know I definitely served. I transitioned out from active duty. What are you talking about? There was no record. There was no history. They had nothing about my name in their system. They couldn't pull up anything on the computer. They had nothing. So I had to provide. And that's what it became. It was like, oh, you need proof? Here's a certificate, but this is all you get. I'm supposed to be secretive about this. I'm supposed to be tight-lipped about this. You really shouldn't know, but I need you to know, because now you're trying to investigate me and put some charges on my name that have nothing to do with the truth. I started to write letters, and my letter writing went from the lowest level to the highest level in the medical command at that particular facility. That's when we started to find that there was something going on about my car accident that just didn't manifest in any sort of documentation anywhere in my life. So then I had to go and bring pictures. That started a whole thing that led me to about a year and a half later, going all the way to Washington, D.C., to the top of that medical evaluation board to discuss why these things weren't as they should be.
So the hospital didn't have records either?
No, nobody had the records of these things. For whatever the reasoning is, there was no record. My pictures and my medical evidence was the only thing that they were referring to every single time. I had to provide it even to the lawyer that went into the room with me in Washington, D.C., to go and argue my case about my stuff, because even he said, they're not going to change anything. They're not going to make any adjustments. We don't have any evidence. Okay, cool. But I have evidence. Here's that. What is that? Oh, they're still not going to change it. And then I went and I spoke for myself. I advocated for myself in front of this lieutenant colonel, this major, and this high grade civilian. And when everything was done, he looked right at the lawyer in the face and said, I changed everything that he wanted. All appropriate changes have been made. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Anson. You know, but I came in and I spoke with them and I said, if I'm not who I say I am, then what is this documentation about? How did I get here? If none of this is real, how is this headstone with these names on it in Section 60 of Arlington if I wasn't there? Just explain that part. That's when it became a thing of, oh, this is a real thing that you do to many other vets. This is not even just about me. I thought it was about me. I thought it was just something I may have done because I can't recall. Did I irk somebody? Did I just really rub the wrong person the wrong way and they just said, oops? But then I started to learn during my journey, no, this is a common thing that you're doing to a lot of veterans, and it happens to just so be veterans of color. That's when it became a real thing that I felt I needed to jump in on.
How'd you find that out?
Vietnam vet, Mr. Charles Jenkins. I saw him when I was walking through the VA with my service dog, Penny, and he appreciated my dog so much that we stopped and had a conversation. When I heard from him how rough his time had been trying to get help, I told him, I said, my only gimmick is I'll come to you and see how you're living and check up on you. And he said, oh, then forget about the stuff that's going on. I need you to come see how I'm living. That's the only reason why I'm up here fussing. So I said, okay. When I went to his place, he's in a chair. He's scooting around with his own feet, pulling his wheelchair around. And as you go up the ramp to his assisted living facility, the bars, the rails on the wheelchair ramp are deteriorating in my hand. This cannot be the same place you're letting this veteran live. Then I go inside. The faces of the drawers in his room are all falling apart. His bed is absolutely just completely wrong, disheveled, falling apart, just duct tape and glue holding this kind of thing together. I got pictures. I got video. They put a handicap placard on the wall. You couldn't use that bathroom. Here is a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran, 2-time, who happens to also have a bullet lodged in his back. And you're expecting this man to go and do this? He can't get his chair in the room. He's in a wheelchair. What are you doing? This is not right. And all of a sudden, that same tenacity that once was a burden for me, that same flipping the tables, we don't want to talk to that guy, he's a nut job, now all of a sudden it worked to Mr. Charles' benefit. Because now I'm going to my church. I'm going to these other veterans and I'm saying, hey, can you help this man, please? This is not okay. You know what I mean? So that was like the start. And then it just continued from there. Once people saw that this was my focus, then other people started to speak up. Hey, man, look, they did me wrong. Hey, look at this. Just look at this paperwork. They said I didn't serve, but how could I have not served? Look at this. I have something that proves my service. And so it just became a thing.
Well, it's definitely become a thing. Like you've got a purpose with it and kind of explain what you're doing now about it.
Well, now it's 3 different pieces all happening simultaneously. I'm doing my own organization, creating my own way with Red Tape Warrior, which is an advocacy organization. But at the same time, the thing that we're really focusing in on is just kind of being that liaison, just kind of standing with that person as they're going through what they're going through and making sure we give them the hand up that they need so that they can sustain on their own instead of just giving them a handout of something they may not necessarily need,
right.
You know, or something that's just fitting our little political agenda. But at the same time, I'm also the chaplain over at the VFW where I get to interact with some of these veterans in distress directly. That's the main role that I fulfill as chaplain, as well as offering, you know, some sort of spiritual guidance and things of that nature. And then the other bigger piece that is a little bit of a struggle at the moment is working with the Veterans Committee at the Savannah NAACP here. That's a little harder to get pushing, unfortunately. There seems to be a disconnect between folks of color and the service. There is a thing with that. So we're working it. It's slow going, but I'm also part of the redress committee. You know, I started off with trying to, you know, chase down my own issues, but in the process now it's become a thing of, hey, we need to look at some reform in this particular area when it comes down to vets of color, because I mean, the difference in treatment is drastic. The difference in understanding is drastic. I went back home to the very same hood that I grew up out of. You know, it's one thing for you to grow up that way, and then you go and you turn and you make a good stride in your life, and then when you're done, you get dropped right back off on the same corner that you left from 10, 11, 12 years before. It's still the same mayhem, still the same chaos, it's still the same troublemakers. Now they're adults. Now they're starting to have kids. Now you're repeating the patterns. I'm still back in the same area. There's still guns, you know, all over the place. There's still shootouts. You know, these are the things that I'm trying to raise my now, you know, young son into. You know, so this is what this thing has become. It's become a thing of really focusing in on attacking this problem and trying to build an honest bridge to help folks over this gap. You know, to get past this one particular hurdle we seem to be stumbling over consistently, the treatment of Black veterans. And I don't know if people are very well aware of it, but it's been enough of a thing where someone felt the need to deface a monument by writing that. And I think that alone is a bigger message than the defacing of the monument. Do Black vets matter is what it said in spray paint across the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. That's a real hard question for people to answer. Because on one hand, they say they do, but on the other hand, I stand here before you talking about Mr. Jenkins. You can't possibly be telling me that you're talking about the same thing when I'm looking at Mr. Jenkins. It took me raising Cain in that man's place, in his stead, for his purpose. If it wasn't for that, he'd still be in that place. Taking all of his, 100% disability money, chasing after his Social Security money. That's not how you treat a veteran. You cannot possibly tell me that's the way you treat a veteran. So,
have you been taken care of at this point? Are you at the place now where you are?
I am in a good place now. It took a lot of kicking and screaming. It took a lot of fussing and fighting. I even have my own personal altercation with law enforcement, which is part of the reason why making sure I'm wearing the shirt that I'm wearing today, because I was one of those young men who was trampled upon by several officers, one of which had his knee in my back over me walking my service dog. He didn't believe my dog was a service dog. He didn't believe I was a disabled veteran. He didn't believe I was a veteran. He joked with his other officer buddies, that's his daddy's hat. That's my daddy's hat. You have a list of my accolades and my awards yourself. These are the same things that adorned my hat. Good conduct medal, air medal, things of that nature. You don't believe I'm a veteran? So who else could I possibly be? Are we just going to tiptoe around this racial issue that you seem to have? Or do you want to go all the way in with this? But this is clearly what you're trying to say. There's no hidden language here. Why else would you not think of me as a veteran? I'm clean cut. I'm well-to-do. What else do you need? I speak well. I look at you directly in your face. I speak with some level of authority. I'm used to being that kind of a guy in a room. It offended this particular guy. He felt some kind of way about this, and he turned this whole thing into a show. It became a poppy show for this man.
What was it originally?
What part?
When you got stopped and the police
It wasn't a stop. It wasn't even one of those kinds of things. I was going to court about being evicted for my service dog from a dog-friendly neighborhood.
Wow.
So now here I am talking about this with the judge, and I get into it with this officer away from the judge, and it just turned into a show. He chased me with 14 other officers, over this service dog. And then a few days later, slammed me on my face in the courthouse in front of the judge because he didn't like the way that I spoke to him. Sir, I don't like the fact that your buddy had his knee in my back, nor do I like the fact that you decided to administer a chokehold that the whole world is saying you shouldn't even be doing to begin with. We're all talking about this at all different levels of government, police reform. We're talking about getting rid of the chokehold, the argument of whether or not the chokehold should be legitimized. No, get rid of it. You're killing people on the side of the street, and that's not what we do. Here I am, a combat vet, You know how many times we brought back people without body bags? You're telling me that you can't do this in America? The place I'm supposed to be defending, I now have to defend myself against the very people who are supposed to be defending me too? So it's a touchy subject for me.
I bet. How long ago was this?
This is going on 2 years now.
2 years.
2 years without my dog.
So what? Man.
My dog was my peace.
Yeah.
With all of the stuff that I had going on, that dog was a piece of consistent something for me. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that made it great with her is she was deaf. She helped me to gain a little bit of myself back. Mm-hmm. I was able to do new things, like learn sign language. It was a different way of communicating because I have some emotional regulation issues because of the nature of my head injury. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to express myself without being so animated, without wanting to talk with my hands, without physically, viscerally expressing myself. However, in sign language, you have to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a part of your speech. If you're happy, you go, I'm learning sign language. If you're mad, you go, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's very expressive. So I'm able to be myself more. And that dog gave me that freedom. I didn't give her the freedom. She gave me the freedom. She gave me the confidence to go outside and face the world, because now you're not worried about how dangerous I am as a young black man. You're worried about how dangerous she is as a pit bull. And all of a sudden, the smiling guy is the peaceable guy. This was the kind of thing that went on. And once people said to me, oh, that's a beautiful dog, one of the first things I would say is, my dog is deaf. And then from there, they go, oh my goodness, she's deaf? How do you talk to a deaf dog? How do you control a deaf pit bull? And that started the conversation. Then we would talk about the traumas. We would talk about different things. It opened me up. Yeah. It gave me the opportunity to be vulnerable when I needed to be. Man. So here I am now without the dog doing it. It's very hard. It is definitely very rough. She was a main piece of my life for quite some time, for almost 4 years.
So where does that stand? Where does that stand right now?
She's in limbo. Unfortunately, once the police officers took the dog, she ended up at the animal control. We've been fussing back and forth about rights, legalities, and everything to do with what's supposed to happen with this dog. Somewhere in the mix-up, this head of animal control gave the dog to someone she knows, and that's the only thing she's willing to say. She just continually encourages anyone who inquires about the dog that the dog is alive and well. I want proof. Show me my dog. Mm-hmm. If you got her and she's somewhere safe, show me. Send me an accurate picture right now. Something, anything. Let me know my dog is not dead, because that's what you usually do to deaf pit bulls in this, especially in this state. Once again, racially, we've gone here before. Football, pit bulls. Do we have to say more? We know what they do with these dogs. They get a bad rap. This dog is not one of those dogs. Mm-hmm.
Are you allowed to get that dog back?
I should be. This is what's on the table. This was the argument that went all the way up to state court. At this point now, I have to see about getting some sort of an appellate lawyer or something like that and take it to the Court of Appeals. It has to go higher.
Jeez.
It shouldn't have to go that high. Mm-hmm. It should just be give me the dog. Mm-hmm. Or at least show me she's alive and well. At this point now, at least let me know that she's in the care of someone who would appreciate her as much or greater than I would. That's all. If it's her time, her season to be with someone else, and my season is up, so be it. I'm here now. Mm-hmm. I was talking to the dog because I didn't want to talk to people like you. I didn't want to have to tell these kinds of stories. I never wanted to disclose the roughness of how I came up, or the abuse that I had to endure, or the silliness that went on in my military career. I just wanted to move forward with my life. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about the alienation of my kids, I got the dog when my lady left. I had the dog for almost 4 years. I physically have not laid eyes on my children in 2. Mm-hmm. I lost a dog the day after I lost the case about my kids. I haven't seen them since. That was on April 17th when I lost the case about my kids. April 18th is when I got into it with the police officer over my dog.
Mm-hmm.
I lost her ever since. I lost my mind. That dog saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's been rough. It's been about 6 weeks now since I've heard my children's voices. And one of the first things that my daughter had to tell me was how upset she was that Daddy missed her birthday. Daddy's got her birthday tattooed on his chest.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely no way, even with my memory issues, that Daddy forgot her birthday. I see it every time I bathe. It's right here on my chest.
Mm-hmm.
The other side is my son. You go through that pain, you don't forget that either. I know what day is your birthday, baby girl. I'm going through it with Mom, and it's hard to talk about these things. Mom is mad because Daddy he had some infidelities. These are just the coping mechanisms that some of these men are going through. I'm not the only one. There's so many of these vets that have had these same issues happening, and they're starting to speak up. Buffalo, I got a guy all the way up in New York. He's now in his second child that he's being alienated from a totally different woman than the first. This seems to be a real horrible pattern that is occurring, and it needs to be addressed. Same thing with the vets of color. It needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry. Let me step back down off my soapbox. Give you
No,
back
you're
your
good.
show.
I mean, this is your next battle, man. I mean, like, I'm just, for all that to happen at that point in your life when, you know, you're out, maybe you feel like you're getting healthy, the dog is like really helping you, and now you don't have that. Like, do you have fears of like, man, these really emotional, hard things are happening right now, and I don't want to go to that mental place where I've been in the past? Like, how do you deal with it mentally, emotionally, spiritually, when maybe the dog was kind of the answer for you at that point? Like, do you fear like, man, I can't just sit here alone? Or are there other entities or people or somebody that's helping you, you know, now get through all of this stuff?
This is why I'm where I am. The position of chaplain within the VFW has been a big piece of my continued recovery, because this is a daily struggle.
Sure.
Okay. Once again, because of the nature of my personal injuries, when I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, I'm usually waking up from a nightmare. The nightmare is usually a real event that I just won't try to recall normally, consciously. So it happens subconsciously. And then once I arise, I'm kind of starting from July 25th, and I'm working through all of the traumas, everything all the way up until today's date. So those first few hours awake I'm not really there. I'm catching up on my day. Usually I would go outside with my dog at that point, but now I go outside and I just talk to God. I would talk to the dog. Now I talk to God. So it just slightly changed. You know, I've kind of flipped the letters around a little bit. That's where I go now. You know what I mean? I had the dog. Cool, the dog worked. Flipped it around. Now I got God. Now I'm doing a little bit better without the physical crutch. But because of my struggles and how similar it has been to others, I now have a major sense of purpose here. And that's one of those things that has always been missing from these vets that are transitioning away from the service. They lose that sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm almost restoring the level of brotherhood to a whole different level now, because the struggle, we're bonding off of the struggle amongst different races, amongst different religions, amongst different creeds. Infantrymen are sitting next to medics or sitting next to aviators, and we're all joking about how we've been hurting all this time and how we found purpose in what we're doing going forward. This is how the Red Tape Warrior organization is starting to come together now. I had an opportunity to reach out with a few other young vets who happen to be officers as well within the VFW, and we are organizing. We are coming together and looking after our own new generation of, embattled people, folks who are a little broken from war.
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff that has come out of it. Not to mention, I'm sure the officer himself is running around beating his chest, telling some kind of a cool story hey, I got a chance to rough up a special operator. Cool. Well, now this special operator also has a story. Thank you very much, officer. I appreciate you. Because without you, I wouldn't have a story to tell here and how I've been able to be so resilient and overcome and do. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Let me beat my chest too. Mm. Thank you. You know what I mean? So in the wake of the Ahmaud Arbery, the George Floyd, and all of these different situations that are happening, it has really given me some major propulsion when it comes down to talking about folks of color from the veteran perspective. Yeah. We're people. We see green on this side. We don't see color. We don't see race. We don't see religion on this side. So we say it's not true to a point. This is some of the stuff that is now being put on the table. These are the conversations that we are now forced to have at this point. Mm-hmm. This platform is proof positive of that very thing. So this is where we are now. It's reaching out to many people across the board. This 22 ride that's coming up in August for the 22 silenced vets who commit suicide daily. I've been able to bridge the gap between the American Legion and the VFW, some of the other smaller veteran organizations that are popping up left mm-hmm. and right, or that have always been in the background. We're all starting to kind of all point to the same direction. Nice. And we're working together to really be a good, to have some good coverage to keep these guys from falling in the crack as the rest of us build the bridges we need to help them overcome it overall.
Cool. Well, I do want to come back to that before we end, but before that, just please. A couple other questions. Sure. While we kind of wind down a little bit, and it's hard to wind down when I could ask you a million questions right now, but one of them was just, you're talking about being a chaplain now, and you went to church when you were younger. Just interested in what your view of God or your faith was, whether you can remember it or being able to piece stuff together. Like, how differently did you view God and your faith through all those different things? For when, man, I went through this as a child, my family, there was abuse, and then this stuff happened in the military, the accident. Like, man, there's some moments I hated him, some moments I loved him. I see the purpose. I mean, there's so many different ways you could go, but just what has that been like for you?
It's been a roller coaster ride. That would probably be the most accurate description of my spiritual journey. Once again, there's parts and pieces that I know I recall. There's definitely parts and pieces I don't. But for the most part, there has always been some sort of a spiritual grounding of sorts consistently throughout my life. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, my maternal grandmother was a Seventh-day Adventist. So we were very heavy with going to church on Saturday. You would start the Sabbath at 8 o'clock on Friday, and you couldn't watch regular TV until 8 o'clock on Saturday. Everything was all about God and stories in the Bible and things of that nature. So I had that kind of foundation. But as I grew into my adolescence, of course, I strayed. I came back to it a little bit in the military, but it was touch and go because of the nature of my job. By the time we get to 2009, 2010, I'm absolutely enraged and turning my back to anything and everything that had to do with spirituality. I had completely moved away from that because of the nature of some of the things that I had to recall from my service. At this point, my nightmares were so visceral. I was jumping out of my bed and already across the room before I was actually conscious enough to realize where I was. So I was essentially sleepwalking, fighting in my sleep, kicking and screaming, yelling, having the physical reactions to a lot of the traumas that I had endured. And it was only once I got that dog that it started to kind of turn. I gave up everything. At that point, I just allowed everything to just be so I could focus on a few more important things. Trying to maintain, being in my children's life was one big piece. My son is the immediate driving force behind this stuff. My daughter is the second. And both of them have very spiritually aware names. My son has my full name, but he has a second middle name of Emmanuel, God with us. So that was another piece that helped me to kind of turn my back around and face God again. Like, hey, I have to be a father to this kid, and I don't know how to be a father to this kid. My dad wasn't a great dad for me. So now what do I do going forward? And the only thing I could do is refer back to scripture, refer back to his word. My daughter is the one that helped me to really turn around the anger and the angst that I did have, because no matter what daddy went through, my daughter was always saying, Daddy, it's okay. Daddy, be cool. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. It brings a smile to my face just thinking about it. I got into it with my old lady one day and took it out on the wall behind me. And then in shame for my inability to control my emotion, I sat down on the couch. And my daughter looked at my hands that were at this point all scaled up, and bloodied and whatnot. And she came over and she just, it'll be better, Daddy. It's okay. Because that's what I did. I always kissed the boo-boo. You know what I mean? So watching her and softening up with her put me back in the mindset to say, I need to do something different than I've ever done before in my entire life, because that little girl needs her dad more so than anybody else. And thinking about my childhood and wishing that my dad was around when those, rougher things were happening, I turn and look at my son and I have to do something different. So it slowly just became a thing. I stayed firm with what I thought I believed in until I could kind of put something solid behind it. And once I was able to kind of sit down with some pastors and some bishops of some churches and really talk to them about what I had going through, that's when he said, you have a test that you passed, and now you have a testimony. You should go speak. You have a wonderful voice. You should go speak. That's how we get to this radio voice conversation we were talking about earlier. Voice. I had an opportunity to sit down with a lady I respected who was like a second mom to me. And she gave me an opportunity to come on her show. And I was disheveled at the moment. This was just prior to the dog. So my hair was a mess. My face was a mess. I probably was bathing, twice a week. Didn't want to brush my teeth. Like, I was completely and utterly depressed. And she said, it's radio. Nobody can see you. They can only hear you. So I put on the headset. I got to talking. And I realized at that point how intense my voice had always been, why I seemingly scare people when I speak, because I didn't realize how loud that was to everyone else. I hear my voice from me. You hear my voice totally different than I do. So I was able to get on that show, hear my voice, and change my pitch. And then from there, me opening up about the sexual abuse in the very first episode led to another man confessing about the sexual abuse that he had gone through. And then it also drove a change to my, for my stepdad at the time, who was going through some issues and some ailments, to kind of turn his life towards Christ. And he was baptized on March 1st of the very year he passed away. He passed away actually that same month.
Oh, wow.
He was dealing with a heart condition. And he got baptized the first of that month. And by the end of that March, he had passed on.
Wow.
So that was like the beginning of turning back towards God and just saying humbly, like, okay, you have some steps for me. Let's do this.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Let me do what it is you're asking of me to do. And he just keeps saying, speak. Use the voice I gave you, but use my words. And so this is the kind of stuff that I do going forward. As a matter of fact, may I?
You may.
Because there is a scripture that I am very fond of these days that seemingly speaks to me. And it's Ecclesiastes 9. Stand by as I pull it up for 1 second. I know how this stuff goes.
I'm just going to guess while you're looking. 11. 10 and 11.
I believe it's 10 and 11. The race is not to the swift, but at the end of it, people always misquote it. It always enduring to the end. No, time and chance happeneth to them all, is how King James says it. that whole scripture to me speaks so much to me, because I'm fast, but I wasn't the fastest guy in special operations. I'm quick, but I wasn't the quickest guy, you know, off the line when it came to me running track as a kid. I wasn't the best saxophone player when I was in the jazz band in junior high school, you know.
But we didn't get to talk about that. Jeez.
This is more material for another show. It's just another reason for me to come back. But the point is, you know, and see, this is what I mean. I don't recall those things.
Yeah.
You know, we really have to kind of pull that. But I wasn't always the greatest at everything, but I'm good at this. And in order to be good at this, I have to be present. I cannot have this show with you if I don't show up. I can have the greatest voice in the world, the most wonderful intellect you've ever been around. I can have the most amazing character that you've ever been able to sit in the same room with. But if I don't show up, what do you have except an empty chair and a microphone with no audio? You have to show up.
Yeah.
You have to do the work. And so that's what this has become for me. I show up.
Yeah.
God says be somewhere, and I show up. Go help that vet, and I'm there. That's why my only gimmick is I show up.
Yeah.
If you need help, I'm going to come and see you, because if I could see you disheveled, if I can see your house is a wreck, we'll go straighten that out. That's another piece that got me started. Mr. Jenkins led to another guy out in Texas, led to another guy. I'm cleaning these people's lives up. I'm helping to restore these veterans.
Yeah.
They were just discarded like trash. And I took that and I recycled them and I helped them to get back in. It's not everything to do with me. I can't take the credit. That's God. But I'm glad to be the vessel.
Yeah. No, it's really
You know
cool
what I
that you're
mean?
going to do that, man. It is. Just one question before we get to the end and kind of talking about what you're going to be doing next, but just the mental health side of how you've been able to go through all this stuff, and even where you're at now. We don't think into the full history of how maybe you were diagnosed and what people wanted you to do, but I imagine a lot of it had to do with, you know, pills or taking all these kind of things and just kind of quick fix stuff. And I'm not saying pills are bad or anything, but, you know, with everything you've gone through, I'm sure you've been diagnosed all sorts of different ways. And, you know, are you at a place now where you feel like you're at a healthy spot where whether you are taking something or you aren't taking something, but like I can see that I'm able to think clearly, I'm not on things I don't need to be, and I'm where I need to go, at least from the mental side of it.
Yeah, that was another big piece of the struggle, was the over-medication, the over-medicating that would, you know, traditionally happen as you were transitioning out of the military. This has been something that's been huge all over the news, these warrior transition units and battalions that were just popping pills left and right. We were like Pez dispensers. That's what we used to joke amongst ourselves about. We were Pez dispensers. But with that, you know, and the rest of my fight, it led to me stepping away from all of those meds completely, but also stepping away from alcohol and some of the other things that were getting in the way. The one thing that I am a big supporter of is medicinal marijuana. It's something that is really helping the vets, especially when it comes down to their emotional issues, the inability to regulate is something that this is helping with. For some of us, we get so worked up with stress, we lose appetites and things of that nature, we lose sleep. These are some of the things that are being counteracted with something like medicinal marijuana. And it's always been a taboo thing because of the stigmas and such, but this is something that has honestly been helping myself and a whole slew of other veterans, on top of the fact that I have a memory issue already.
Yeah.
Some of the bigger side effects that we always are concerned with when it comes down to marijuana is memory issues, short-term memory loss and those things of, you know, that nature. But I already deal with that. So I'm not worried about that part. You know what I mean? It's not a major thing for me. Short-term memory loss is my life. But at the end of the day, the fact that there is an element of trying to minimize the reactions because of what we remember, this is another aid and another piece, you know, to that stuff. So I'm hoping I'm kind of hitting
you're good. Just kind of wanted your perspective on that.
Yeah, what you're saying there.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit, just briefly, like the event on August 22nd, what is it, and kind of what you've been a part of trying to get it together?
So for short, it's 22 for 22. The full title is Silent 22 for the 22 Silenced. It is a gathering at various veteran memorial cemeteries around the country, showing reflection, showing some sort of reverence, giving some sort of an appreciation to those who paid the ultimate price, to include those that we are continually losing every day to suicide. This veteran suicide crisis is exactly that. We're losing 22 every day. Numbers are changing, especially with COVID. I do believe right now we're looking at more increased numbers than what they recently put out of a 17.5 average. But this whole thing now is to go and show some solidarity with our fallen brothers and sisters, to gather quietly, not a protest, not a riot, and to really show people in America what it's like to have these peaceful gatherings, what this peaceful gathering looks like. We know war. We also know peace. We want peace. So this whole thing is to really just kind of stir the country in the right way, in the right direction, showing all of us of all different nations, races, creeds, religions, that we can all stand together for a common good. Mm-hmm. And we are going to have a 22-minute silent break from 2:22 p.m. until 2:44 p.m. to give that silence. In that time frame, I'm hoping that some of us can hear the pain that some of these other people have been carrying around all of this time.
Oh, wow.
I think in 22 minutes, you're going to hear the cries, and you're going to hear the outcries of the widows, the children who have lost their fathers and such to these things. We even had a woman come in just yesterday about this stuff in the VFW, and I'm standing up with her because she lost her husband, who was a Ranger, to suicide, and she has been clawing and scratching at every single thing that she can to get someone's attention on this, and she's got my attention now. So we're really pushing for this thing to go. Cool. And a lot of different MCs and RCs and MAs are all, a part of this. This thing is just, it's amazing me, the level that this turnout has become, the level to which this turnout is growing to. It's amazing. And I can only thank God, because I can't take all the credit. It's not me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sounds like a really powerful thing. So glad you're doing it, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I appreciate your story. Appreciate everything. I mean, been here a while talking about this, and we can go on a lot more. We really could, but at the end of the podcast, we always like to ask, especially for people who are listening, not everybody has went through what you have been through, and that's what makes us all unique. But there's so many elements of your story that someone else can identify with. I mean, sexual abuse at a young age, just sexual abuse in general, suicide, attempt of suicide, loss of family, or being in an accident, a VA, veteran. So all these different situations, mental health. I mean, there's so many different things that you've gone through. Race, being estranged from family.
Yeah.
And we don't have to go to a specific one of those things, but just overall, when someone is going through something in that kind of situation where it is drastically affecting your life, and it's causing depression, it's causing all sorts of loneliness and mental health things, how can just an average person in your life that knows you, how can they step in and do something just tangibly that can help in those moments in what you went through?
Listen, some of these folks need to speak. Some of them are holding in some really dark things. Listen, when I go and I check on these vets, I listen. Mm-hmm. I hear what their complaints are. Mr. Jenkins wasn't looking for any money. He wasn't looking for anybody to do any sort of special favors for him. He just said, this is just not what I thought this money would afford me. Mm-hmm. This is not okay living for anyone, especially for someone of just my standing, my caliber. So listen, if I didn't listen to Mr. Jenkins, I would have never gone to his place. If I didn't go to his place, we wouldn't have a story. Mm-hmm. Just listen. And please, the crisis line, the there's so many different veteran organizations that are out there that are open to talking to these vets. If you don't feel like you're qualified, please reach them. And if you can't reach them, type in #RedTapeWarrior somewhere on some social media platform and find me, because my job will be to get that vet the help that he needs. Nice. If you're not capable. So please find me. I will come to them and I will bring them to where they can get some real help.
Awesome.
And that's around the country. That's all of these states. I am all over the place. I go everywhere. Now I'm on 2 wheels, so I'm really going everywhere. So thank you again for this opportunity, Nick. This has been an absolute blessing.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely.
And it's mutual. Like I got a lot of things that I need to go think about, talk about, pray about, and do some more research and conversations, because you don't know until you ask. And I think that's a lot how we grow, is we, like you said, we listen to other people. Yeah. And you don't know how to really help and how to be out there in the world for other people until you actually hear from them personally. And when it becomes personal, then you care a lot more. So thank you for helping me care a lot more about a lot of this stuff. So
listen, I tell these guys now, empathy is free and it doesn't cost much to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Just a little bit.
Yeah. That's what we always say on there, is empathy requires proximity, and not just one that's on social media proximity either. It's like getting in the room with somebody, seeing their eyes and what they've been through and hearing their story. So I appreciate you doing that with me and with everyone who's going to watch and listen to this today. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Andre.
All right. Thank you again, Nick.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, Quinn, for producing. Thank you, City Church, for hosting. Hit us up at For the Neglected, and we'll put up your information as well on here. And hope you all have a good one, man. Peace.
All righty.